be making this gorgeous cardigan here. This is a fun diamond cardigan. It uses simple stitches. We're talking just double crochet stitches, chains, and some single crochets for the ribbing. So it's really beginner friendly, especially where it's made flat. If you're not comfortable working in the round, lucky you, because this entire garment is worked flat. Today I will be using the size G hook. You will also need some scissors, a tapestry needle, and a stitch marker is always a good idea. But mostly I want to talk about the yarn for this intro, this video, because I did something a little bit different for this pattern. On camera, you will see me use the Brava Sport Weight 100% acrylic yarn. This is what the sweater looks like. You probably saw it in the intro videos and as well as the pictures on my blog. I'm making this one a bit longer, but I went ahead and I made two more. A, I love this pattern. B, I wanted to talk about yarn substitutions. So I experimented a bit with different types of yarns. So this yarn here, this is a sport weight as well in the Shine Sport, which is a different texture, drape, everything, because it's 60% Pima Cotton and 40% Modal. The thing about this one is the drape is a little bit heavier. I love that about it. It adds a great drape. But obviously working with a cotton yarn and then an acrylic yarn are two very different things, but it works. And then I also went ahead for this cream one. You'll see it looks a bit puffier because of the yarn. This is the Lion brand Color Theory yarn. This one was really fun to work with as well. This is a worsted weight. And the reason why I wanted to show you working this in 3 different yarns is yarn substitutions is one of the #1 questions I get. I get a lot of emails about, can I substitute this yarn? My answer is always the same. It's yes, if you can match gauge and you still like the drape. So never be afraid of yarn substitutions. Just simply do a gauge swatch. See if you like the drape. You'll notice this one looks a bit puffier. It looks slightly larger. The reason why is it is. Going up to a worsted weight changed my gauge just slightly, not too much. They're very similar, but I knew that I would be okay with an oversized cardigan going up just slightly. Now it did not change my gauge much. We're talking 1 stitch per 4 inches is all it changed it. So I was comfortable at that level thinking that would be a great way to get an oversized cardigan still by working the small size in my size. And these two are also done crop. I did them a bit shorter just to add a bit of a difference there. And I hope you enjoy seeing the variations here. And this helps you get a bit more confident in creating something you like, maybe with yarn you have in your house, or doing a yarn substitution for a yarn you've wanted to try. So it's really up to personal preferences there, and also comes down to meeting that gauge to get the correct sizing. If you cannot meet the gauge, it is not the proper substitution, because it will size so differently you might never wear it, or you don't like the drape. So gauge is #1 thing. If you get that, then you can make any pattern in lots of different yarns. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to start today by doing a small swatch of this diamond repeat, and I'll be using the Sport Brava. Now, the next thing I want to do is I want to show you a swatch with a larger hook and a thicker yarn. So I'm using a bulky weight yarn and a larger hook so that we can easily see these stitches on camera. And I'm simply going to work through the repeat for this pattern. So before we jump into going through each row, I want to talk about the chart. So this is the crochet chart. It is worked from right to left for the odd rows and from left to right for the even rows. So this is worked in rows where we will be working in one direction for the odd rows and the opposite direction for the even rows. It is worked from bottom to top, and it is an 8-row repeat, but you also notice these red lines are indicating that it is also an 8-stitch repeat. So the first stitch here and the last stitch of each row will be a double crochet stitch, and we repeat the stitches between those red lines until we get to the very end of the row where we will work that last stitch. So let's go ahead and work up this exact swatch on camera so you can see how this is done. Now I have chain 10. I am simply going to be working the swatch from that chart so we can see how this works. And there are no chain stitches at the end of each row. I'm going to be starting each row with a stacked single crochet because I find it makes a really crisp edge and is really nice to use. So whenever you're working either a gauge swatch or you're working from the pattern, the stitch count is the same amount as the chains. So I'm simply going to be working the back humps here, and I'm going to do a stacked single crochet for this very first stitch, working into the very first chain from the hook. I'll insert my hook, yarn over and pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through both loops. Now we just completed a single crochet stitch, but we're not done. We're going to insert our hook back through this left bar here, yarn over and pull up a loop, and then yarn over and pull through both loops again. This is stacking 2 single crochets to get the height of a double crochet stitch. This can also be used for a half double crochet stitch as well. So this is our first stitch in the row. You can go ahead and mark it if you need to. Sometimes marking these rows are really smart because if you notice along the side, it looks nice, but we've got 2 V's there. So it's really easy to work around to this stitch, which is what we don't want to do. So it's not a bad idea when you're getting used to the stacked single crochets to go ahead and mark the first stitch in the row. Now for the 8 stitch repeat, we will be doing 3 double crochet stitches. Then we are going to chain 1, skip 1, and double crochet 4. And now we have done the 8 stitch repeat, which is what we would repeat again and again until we get to the end of the row. And for the very last stitch, we'll simply do a double crochet stitch and then go ahead and turn. Of course, this first row is always a bit hard when you're working to chain stitches. It gets much easier when we have stuff to grip with our other hand. So now we're going to turn for row 2, and we're going to start this row with a stacked single crochet. This is how we will be starting every single row. And then we'll go right into our 8 stitch repeat, which is to double crochet 3. And then we will chain 1, skip 1, and double crochet into the next, which if you're double crocheting into a chain space, you're simply going to do just that. Chain 1, skip 1, and double crochet 2. And then that is our 8 stitch repeat. And at the end of the row, you will simply do a double crochet into that last stitch. Now, like I said, you can move a stitch marker at the beginning of each row up until you get used to seeing those stacked single crochets and knowing how to work them at the end of the row. The stitch marker can be useful. So for row 3, we're going to start with a stacked single crochet. And then we'll do our 8 stitch repeat where we double crochet 1, chain 1, skip 1, and double crochet 3. Chain 1, skip 1, and double crochet 2. And that's our 8 stitch repeat. And then at the end of the row, we will simply do a double crochet stitch and turn. For row 4, we are going to start with a stacked single crochet. And this is where we are going to double crochet 1, chain 1, skip 1, double crochet 5. And then we will chain 1 and skip 1, and that is our 8 stitch repeat for this row. And then of course for the last stitch we will double crochet. So that's 4 stitches so far, and you can already see how this works out. This is a fillet crochet style where we're leaving chain spaces that create the diamond, so create the look of this stitch pattern. Now we're going to turn and do row 5. We're going to start with a stacked single crochet. And then we are going to double crochet 7. And then we will chain one, skip one, and double crochet into the last. So our 7-stitch repeat for this row is to double crochet 7, chain 1, skip 1. And now we are on to row 6. So for row 6, once again, we'll start with a stacked single crochet. And for our 8-stitch repeat, we will double crochet into the first stitch there, chain 1, skip 1, double crochet 5, and chain 1 and skip 1. So the 8-stitch repeat is to double crochet 1, chain 1, skip 1, double crochet 5, chain 1, skip 1, and then when we get to the end of the row, we will work a double crochet into the last stitch. Now we will turn and do row 7, where we start with a stacked single crochet. Our 8-stitch repeat will begin with a double crochet 1, chain 1, skip 1, then double crochet 3. Chain 1, skip 1, and double crochet 2, and that will be the 8-stitch repeat. And then we will double crochet into the last stitch of this row. And now we're going to turn and do row 8. This will be our final row here for the 8-row repeat. We will start by doing a stacked single crochet. We'll double crochet 3 to start this 8-stitch repeat. Chain 1, skip 1, double crochet 1, chain 1, skip 1, and then double crochet 2. And that's the 8-stitch repeat. And then at the end of the row, we will double crochet into the last stitch. So this is the repeat. If we just keep doing those 8 rows again and again, that's what gives us this beautiful diamond look. And we'll be using a smaller yarn and a lot more stitches, and that will create a lot of diamonds within each row. So since we've done this section, now we can start translating this to our cardigan, and this is worked flat. So we're going to talk about how we get started with working the back panel of this cardigan. So now when you start working with your G-hook and the sport weight yarn, you'll start by chaining 82 for the size small. So the size small is what I'm going to be showing on camera here, and each size will have a different stitch count. Before the size small, you will chain 82 and then work right into that first chain from the hook, and then you will work the 82 stitches across in this row repeat. Now, however many times you do this row repeat will determine on the length of this cardigan. So I also have that in the pattern that you'll repeat rows 1 through 8, 2 more times for a crop length, 3 more times for a hip length, and then you can go 4 or 5 more times depending on the height that you want. For this one here, I have done 5 repeats total, and this is the length I'm doing before we get to the underarm. So this is what it will look like. You'll basically just be making this large square of fabric in that diamond repeat, rows 1 through 8, until you have the length that you prefer from your underarm down. Now that we have the back part of our cardigan, it is time for us to add our arms. Since we're making this flat, we'll need to add our arms both to the right side and the left side of this main back piece of fabric. To do this, I find the easiest thing to do is just to leave the yarn you have attached here. So you just finished row 8 and you turned. Grab a second ball of yarn because you already have a second ball of yarn handy. You need one to complete this anyway. And go ahead and pull out a strand. Go ahead and attach this yarn to the left side of this cardigan. And then we are going to chain a total of 64 chains. Now, 64 chains is what we're going to chain on each side. This will be the length of your sleeve. It will be approximately 16 inches, and then we'll have some ribbing for a cuff that will make it even longer. But if you have longer or shorter arms, you can increase or decrease these chains in multiples of 8 to have it work out. Now that we have 64 chains on this side, we can go ahead and fasten this off. I know that we didn't use that ball for very long, but we're really just setting up this side to work across when we come to it after working the right side first. So I'm fastening off. I'm just going to leave this here We'll be working into all those chain stitches in just a moment. Now we're going to go back to this other side of this cardigan, and we're also going to chain 64 stitches along this side. Now for this size small, once we add 64 stitches, work across the body, and then do 64 more stitches, we will have a total of 210 stitches to work across in the stitch pattern. So what we will do is we'll start our next row. So this should be row 1 of the repeat. So in the very first stitch, we're going to do a stacked single crochet. And you can mark it if you want. And then we will double crochet 3. Chain 1, skip 1, and double crochet 4. And that's going to be our repeat across. We're going to be doing this all the way across these chain stitches, across the body stitches, and making sure that these do line up. They should line up if you've got your stitch count correct. And yeah, just keep working those all the way across. So as you work across these chain stitches, as you get to the body, you'll be able to just go right into that first stitch from the body, still continuing to work in the stitch pattern repeat from row 1. So to work out exactly as it should with these stitches, keeping in that stitch pattern. And then you'll continue to work across the body like so, and then you'll work the other chain stitches from the other side. So after working across row 1, you can see you're all set up to work across the total amount of stitches. So you'll be working all the way across here. It looks funny now, but the more you build it, the more it will make sense. So you are going to work, including the row we just did, a total of 16 rows for the size small. And then we'll talk about splitting for the front of this because we'll want an opening. So we're going to work 16 rows, including this first one we did. So that is a total of 2 repeats, and then come on back. Now we have done these 16 rows for this cardigan, and you can see it's starting to look like, oh, hey, here's some arms in the back. We can see where we are headed now. So our next steps after working these rows is to work the front panel. So we'll want to leave an opening for our front and our neck. And I've gone ahead and marked these. So for the size small, you're going to count over 97 stitches, then mark, count and skip the next 16 stitches, and then mark the next, and from this marker down it should be another 97 stitches. So we'll go ahead and we'll work until we get to this first stitch marker, and then stop and turn and work 16 more rows just to this stitch marker, leaving all the rest over here unworked for now. We're just going to be working on this arm and front panel for this next section. So keep working in that established row pattern, working until this first stitch marker, so the first 97 stitches for 16 more rows. Now once we have this section complete, this is our arm. So we did these 16 rows where we worked across everything, and then we did the 16 rows where we're leaving space for the neck, and we've got our section here. But now we no longer need the arm section. If we were to fold this down, we would see that we now have an arm, but what we're lacking is this front section where we have the open area for the neck, and now we need this section. So this is where we're going to stop working the arm stitches. We're going to reattach our arms. We're going to reattach, omitting the arm stitches, and just work this front panel. The way this works out is we'll need to cut our yarn since we're ending here. When we work on the other side, we won't have to cut our yarn, but for this side, we do need to cut our yarn and then skip the arm stitches. So when you're working this, however many stitches you change for the arms on the sides of each of the body section, middle section, that's how many we will be skipping up here. So we are going to be turning this, so we're keeping it in pattern, and skip 64 stitches. So after skipping the 64 stitches, because we no longer need those arm stitches, I'm going to go ahead and join my yarn and then continue to work in this established diamond pattern. Now it might look a little bit different right here for this section, simply because we may not be starting off the same as we are on this side, but for this portion of the arm, we can still be using the same chart. We're just continuing in that repeat as it starts. So I'm going to join my yarn here. I'm going to start with a stacked single crochet. And then work this row as the established row pattern. So we're just continuing to make those diamond shapes here. And we'll be working just these stitches. We're not working any of the arm stitches on this other side. So once we have this first section done of our arms, we have the split for the neck, we did our arms, and then we have this panel here. We will do this panel for one more row than we did this back panel for. So this back panel I did for 40 rows, remember, before we added the arms. And now once we are finished doing the arm section, we need to do this length, but we're going to do it for one more row, then the back panel, to make sure it's going to match up when we do the seaming. So I did 41 rows on this front panel and I fastened off so that I can go on to the next section. Now, once we've worked our first panel side, we're going to come back to these neck stitches that we skipped, and we want to start leaving 16 unworked, join the yarn, and work the other arm panel just the same way across the same amount of stitches as we did on this side. So go ahead and leave these center 16 stitches unworked, join your yarn, and then work from that point over for 16 total rows. So now that we have done this second side, which this is the arms, we have the center neck over here, and we've done this other side of the arms. And so we've got that complete with how many rows we need. And for this one, because of where we have finished our 16 rows for the size, we do not need to fasten off. We can go right into working those first 33 stitches for this size, and then continue to do that to match this front panel on the opposite side. So 41 rows is what I'm doing for this longer one. If you want to do a crop, you can do 16 rows. Really, you can do any multiple of 8 that you prefer, like matching the back panel. But whatever you did on this panel or the back panel, we want to keep those the right amount. So for this panel, I did 41 rows. For this panel, we'll also do 41 rows, working the same amount of stitches that we did over here, leaving the rest of the arm unworked. And this will also match the back panel +1. So whatever you worked on the back panel, you'll be doing these front panels the same count plus one more row. So I'm going to work this panel, and then that will be at the point where we can block this flat. Now at this point of your cardigan, you've gone ahead and done this front panel, and this front panel, once again, will be one more row than the back panel of the cardigan. That way it matches up when we start to seam. So I fastened off. I have left a long tail for this last one because it will be useful here. I'll show you in just a moment. But this looks like a really odd shape. We have this back panel down here. We have these arm areas, the front center for the neck, and then we have these front panels. And overall, the shape of it is quite interesting. But the cool thing is what happens next. What we will do at this point is block. If you want to block, if you don't feel like you're seeing the diamonds as well as you'd like to, a lot of times blocking this will really open up the chain one spaces. But then we're going to go ahead and fold this down. And as I pull it up, then we can see our cardigan shape. We have the arms out here to the side. We bring these panels together. We have the opening for the front, and all of a sudden that weird shape becomes a cardigan. This is why I love these flat cardigans. They're really simple to do, and they take shape really quickly too, and they look awesome. So now at this point, we are going to be seaming. We're going to start at the bottom sides. So we're going to be starting down at this bottom, working up to the underarm and then across this arm here. So we're going to seam from this point all the way up to the underarm and then over across the arms. Now, when we start to do this seaming, these sides will match up pretty well, pretty closely. You'll want to match up row per row to just kind of keep that diamond effect going along the sides as we seam here. And then when you get to the underarms, because we had one more row on the front so that it does match up better down here, we will want to just simply work that into the underarm space and then join here for the underarms. Pinning it can be helpful, but the one row that's extra, it really is easy to just kind of stick it in where these join for the underarm, giving it a little bit more space there. It doesn't add any bulkiness, that extra row, but keeping it even from, which is why we're going to start from down here, keeping it even from here up to here is crucial in order to make sure that these sides line up quite well. We want them to line up because if we hadn't done that extra row, I just want to show you, it would line up quite oddly. See how that doesn't really work out? But by doing that extra row and pulling it down a little, we see that these diamonds still look correct, and that's what we want. We want it to look like as if it's flowing from back to front on those sides. And this other side will be very similar, same way that we're seaming. And when we match up these sides and we see how they look together, they look quite nicely seaming it this way, having those diamonds match up and line up along the edges there. Now, after you've done the side seaming, come on back, and the last steps will be the ribbing. So we're going to seam up both these sides, then we'll come back and we'll talk about the ribbing for the bottom part of this, the front opening ribbing, and then the arm ribbing. So we don't have too many steps left, but ribbing I know can sometimes feel a bit slow, but it's worth it in order to make it look nice. So once these are seamed, we can go ahead and start on that ribbing. So now that we have this seamed, it's really fun to try it on and see how it looks on you, because now it really does look like a cardigan. And like I said, our last steps are going to be the ribbing that will happen. The first set of ribbing that we're going to do is going to be all the way around the bottom, and then the next step will be doing the center ribbing around the neck. So I'm going to flip this upside down so that I'm set up to be working on the ribbing. So I'm going to be starting from this bottom corner and chaining an amount and working all the way around the bottom of this cardigan. So I'll insert my hook on that very first stitch, and this is where I'm going to join my yarn and chain 12. And I'll tighten down my last chain, and starting in the second chain from the hook, we will single crochet in each across. So that will be 11 single crochet stitches. And I'm going to pull this out so we can see it a bit better. This is the bottom of the cardigan here all the way across. We do have our seams, and those will be less noticeable as we work across them. But we're going to be working all the way across the bottom of this cardigan to the other corner with this ribbing. Now, after single crocheting the 11 stitches from where we started at the end of our chain, we are going to be slip stitching into the next 2 stitches along the bottom here. And then we're going to turn our work to the other side. And now we're going to skip those 2 stitches, those 2 slip stitches from the bottom of this cardigan, and working in the back loop only, we will single crochet until the last stitch in the row. For the last stitch in the row, you can work it in the back loop, but if you want a little bit of a straighter edge when it comes to ribbing, it's a good idea to work through both loops for the first and the last stitch on this edge. So as I get to the last stitch in this row, I'm going to work through both of the loops there and then turn again. And now we're going to be working back down this section again by working you can chain one if you want. You don't have to. Honestly, you can go right into working a single crochet stitch, but I'm going to work that through both the loops, and then working in the back loop only, I'll work the remaining stitches until I get to the edge of the cardigan again. Now that we worked to the edge of the cardigan, we will slip stitch into the next 2 stitches, and everything from here on out is just repeating those last 2 rows. So I'm going to turn my work, skip those 2 slip stitches that we just did from the edge, and in the back loop only work the stitches across in single crochet. And then in the last stitch of this row, you can work through both loops of the hook for a straighter edge on the very bottom. And there's the last stitch of the row, and now I'm going to turn my work again, and we are going to chain 1. Now there's 2 things I want you to notice that I've been doing here when it comes to turning. When I turned back this way, you'll notice that I think this comes from being a knitter. I simply flicked my yarn around my crochet hook to be where it needs to be set up. I do that so I don't have to turn the entire garment every single time, rotating it around and around. You can also place this cardigan into a shallow bowl on your lap, and that way when you are rotating this back and forth, you're just simply spinning the bowl on your lap versus flipping the entire cardigan, because it can get quite bulky on your lap if you're moving that entire cardigan off for every single row of this ribbing, because we have quite a bit to do. So we'll simply be continuing those last 2 rows, working down the stitches, slip stitching 2 from the cardigan edge, turning and skipping the 2 slip stitches, and working in the back loops only all the way back up. And we'll be repeating that over and over. It looks like ribbing in those single crochet stitches all the way across the bottom of this cardigan until we get to the other corner, and then we'll go ahead and fasten off. So now I've worked this ribbing all the way along the bottom here, and the last row that I worked it away from the bottom of the body edge, and now we're ready to work around the opening of the neck, so the front area. We can start from this edge without having to fasten off. That's why we're going to work our last row this way, and that way we're set up to begin to work around the opening of the cardigan. So this is the front of the cardigan. I'm going to go ahead and work the same style of ribbing all along the front here. We'll start by chaining 12. And then doing a single crochet in the second chain from the hook and in the remaining ones across. So this is the exact same instructions that we did before. We're just rotating our work and beginning to work this now along the front opening of the cardigan. So you'll continue to work just as we did down here, but we're doing it across here. And when you get to this, where we have our double crochet rows, you're going to slip stitch 2 slip stitches per double crochet row along that edge to attach it along the front. So I worked a little bit more here so you can see how this is going to look. And when you get to these double crochet rows here, this is where we're simply going to do 2 slip stitches along the edge per each double crochet row, and then you'll turn and skip those 2 slip stitches and work the 11 stitches back down. And that is how we're going to work this ribbing all along the front. Here's another quick view of this cardigan. It's so long, it's hard for me to fit on camera, but you can see where we are working our stitches now up the front for the ribbing. So we did all along the bottom here, and now we have like turned and we're starting to work up the front, and we will work all the way up around the neck and back down the side. So you're just working along this front edge until you get all the way to the bottom here, and then you'll be able to finish off matching the other side. Now that we have worked all the way around the front, we've come back down to this other side, we can go ahead and fasten off and weave in our ends. And now that we've got this front ribbing done, we can see how nice and trimmed up this looks. It is so gorgeous. I love how the diamonds look with this trim, and we've got it all the way down to the bottom. So we've got our bottom ribbing. You may find you have some curlings on the ends here. The fabric will naturally do that. You can go ahead and block that out to give it a bit of a crisper look. And the next step that we'll need to do is ribbing along the sleeves. Now the next steps for the sleeve is we'll want to join our yarn on the underneath seam. I just like to join underneath where that seam is, just to kind of hide any seam we may have here from our first row to our last row. We're going to be working ribbing the exact same way that we worked it with the 11 stitches on the front and the bottom of the cardigan. However, we're only going to be working one row of ribbing per row on the sleeve. So we're not going to be slip stitching 2 per double crochet row on the body edge. We're going to be just slip stitching 1 stitch per double crochet row along that edge. So I'll start by chaining 12. And then we'll go ahead and single crochet in the second chain from the hook and in the remaining stitches across for 11 total stitches. Now, as we get to the sleeve edge here, we are going to slip stitch 2 stitches, but we're slip stitching 1 stitch per row. That's what allows us to gather in for a nice puff sleeve. It will make it so that this cuff isn't so wide, and we'll have a nice ribbing that will pull this in. Let me show you what I mean by this. I've already gone ahead and done the other sleeve on this cardigan so you can see where we are headed. So here's the other sleeve. Notice how it really pulls in so it fits our wrist nicely. This happens by doing a slip stitch per double crochet row all the way around. So that's how we'll be completing this. I've done 1 slip stitch per double crochet row, and then I'm going to turn my work, skip those 2 slip stitches, and working in the back loops only, single crochet across. So the rest of this will be worked in that same way. We're just working in the back loops only, making that ribbing. The only difference is that when we get to this body down here, we are slip stitching 1 stitch per double crochet row. So work that all the way around and then come on back and I'll show you how to join your last row with your first row. So now that we've worked all the way around the opening of this arm, we can see how it scrunches in quite nicely, creating a nice poof edge, and it's a really nice finish here. So what we'll need to do next is we need to join our current row with our very first row. So I'm going to start with a chain 1, and then we're going to enter into our first stitch and then through the first loop from our first row. So we're just grabbing that loop from the first row. Then we will yarn over and slip stitch these together. And now for the next stitch, we'll enter through the back loop only, grab the loop from the first row, yarn over, and slip stitch together. And this is what we will do all the way down this cuff, is we'll enter through the back loop only, grabbing the first loop from the first row, and then yarn over and slip stitch those together, creating a nice finished edge. You'll do this all the way down this cuff and then fasten off and weave in your ends. Now that we're already down at the bottom, I can go ahead and fasten that off, and we can see that's a really nice join that's really not noticeable. We can weave in our end, and then we have a nice cuff on the end of this sleeve, and we'll repeat that on the other side. Thank you so much for joining me in making this fun diamond cardigan. It's a really simplistic piece. I love making it flat because it's great for beginners and advanced crocheters. It's a really fun project to work up, and it can work up quite quickly. Be sure to hit that subscribe button and come back for more projects soon.